'Cause I find joy within the ordinary. It's extraordinary. Oh, the ordinary. It's extraordinary.
Hey guys, so welcome to today's video. I was just meditating, contemplating, and the thought came to my head to make a video on how experiencing trauma and how being traumatized even is a very positive thing in terms of spiritual awakening, in terms of becoming more conscious, and how actually when you've been through experiences that have traumatized you, as difficult and challenging as it is, I don't think that they happen for no reason at all. I believe, and my experience is, that these traumatic things that happen to us are here to make us become more conscious, more aware. To help us awaken, really, to a new way of being. A way of being that isn't completely lost in the dream world of thought. In my case, I went through some experiences when I was younger that really shook me up. And it really kicked off around the age of 21, and I started experiencing a lot of fear and just chaos within my nervous system. And I wouldn't have called it chaos within my nervous system at the time. I was just aware of crazy thoughts going through my head and just a lot of fear and anxiety and that sort of stuff. But somebody who's experienced trauma, someone who has a lot of challenges within their nervous system because of traumatic things that have happened to them, we have to become incredibly conscious and aware in order not to be pulled into suffering. For the average person who hasn't been through a lot of traumatic stuff, if they get pulled into identification with their emotions and they're caught in unconscious thinking patterns, they're not aware of their mind, they're not aware of their emotions, and they just allow their emotional, psychological world to take over them, which most of humanity do. If you haven't experienced a lot of trauma, then being pulled into that emotional thought world doesn't cause anywhere near the same amount of acute suffering as someone who's experienced trauma. Because for somebody who's experienced trauma, the emotions are so strong, and that creates such intense thinking that to be identified with that, to be lost and unconscious within that, means you're literally pulled into a hell world. And so why is this a positive thing? Why is it a positive thing if you've been through trauma in terms of spiritual awakening? Well, because someone who's experienced trauma, it is absolutely imperative to find a way to get out of that thought, emotion, made self, to find a way to find freedom from that thought, emotion, made self. The motivation to find freedom from the thought, emotion, made self is a lot stronger in somebody who's been traumatized. And as well as the motivation being a lot stronger to find freedom in somebody who's been traumatized, the amount of consciousness, the amount of awareness needed to stay present, to stay in a place of freedom, the amount of consciousness it takes to stay centered, to not be pulled into identification with thought, emotion, made self, is much more. You need, if you've got these very strong fear reactions coming up, these very strong trauma reactions coming up, pulling you into the fight and flight response, you need so much consciousness in order to stay present, so much consciousness in order to not be pulled into that hell world. And so for the traumatized person who's interested in spiritual awakening, they're actually in an incredibly good position because the motivation to find freedom is so strong. And the consciousness generated in order to stay free is so strong that the traumatized person can become very conscious, very awake. They have to become very conscious and very awake in order not to suffer. And one more thing. Well, there might be a few more, but one more thing for now. For somebody who is being pulled in to that hell world of identification with a traumatized self, for somebody who's been pulled into that a lot, for somebody who's been pulled into that for years, and all they know is suffering, all they know of the world is this dark place of suffering. Everything has a heaviness to it. Everything isn't quite right. Everything is almost scary and dense, and it's impossible to feel gratitude. All of these things that the traumatized person goes through. When that traumatized person tastes the freedom and goodness of being, when they taste the freedom and goodness of their own being, they value that so much. Because instead of being the difference between a not nice experience and the goodness and peace of being, it's the difference between being in hell and existing within the goodness and peace of being. And because of that, when the traumatized person tastes the goodness and peace of being, they don't brush it off. They don't think it's boring, anything like that. Peace, the peace of being, becomes the most valuable thing that they have ever tasted, and they will do anything to become that. They will do anything to live from that. The simple peace of being becomes a heaven world for them. Because it is contrasted with the hell of identification with the traumatized, thought, emotion made world. And because the value of the peace of being is so high, the traumatized person has much more motivation to give all of their attention, all of their awareness, to place all of their awareness on the peace of being. And in order for this awakening to take hold, one must really value the simple peace of their own being. That must be the highest value. And that is why having gone through trauma is a positive thing on the spiritual path. Because your value of the peace of being becomes so high that the peace of being just starts to come more and more into the forefront of your experience. You come to know it more and more. You come to live it more and more. You come to become it more and more. And the more you value the peace of being, the more you savour the peace of being, the more you enjoy the peace of being, the more you live with and as the peace of being. The more you start to experience it as this causeless joy, this causeless love, this absolute goodness. And the doorway isn't through finding some big blissed out experience or anything like that. The doorway isn't through that. Although you can have those kind of experiences, there's nothing wrong with that. The doorway is through finding the littlest place inside that isn't suffering. The smallest place inside that is just okay. A place inside that is okay. That's it. Just a place inside that is okay. That is it. That is the doorway to awakening. The doorway to awakening is okayness. And I'll say again, for someone who's been in hell, for someone who's been traumatized and has spent a lot of time in this activated nervous system, constantly being pulled into reactions, continuously on a daily basis being tested, even when they go to bed through nightmares, tested, then okayness, simply the sense of okayness inside is amazing. Okayness becomes so valuable, and because you value it, it grows, and you're drawn deeper and deeper into your own being. You have to be dedicated to this. You have to want freedom more than anything else. You have to have a lot of courage. You have to have a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. Because as difficult as it is being pulled into a traumatized reaction, being pulled into a panicked, fearful reaction in the body and mind, as difficult as that is, it takes an equal amount of courage not to be pulled into that. to stay present and not be taken by that. To stay present and not be taken by those reactions takes a lot of courage, and it takes a hell of a lot of presence. And if you can go beyond the mind when a trauma reaction is coming up, if you can stay free when a trauma reaction is coming up, then the fire of your consciousness will start burning so brightly that egoic identification in everyday life starts to have less and less power over you, and you become more and more free. And then you can just walk around, sit on the sofa, and your awareness is open. You are open. You are free. Your heart is open. And there is this strength inside, this strength of presence inside, this feeling inside that you cannot be broken, that nothing can break you, that none of those traumas broke you. And no matter what happens in your life, you will be okay. There's something within you that can never die, that can never be harmed. Okay. Thank you.
'Cause I find joy within the ordinary. It's extraordinary.